Hello, everybody. Thanks, Kiao, for having me here. My name is Yidan Shang. I'm now a postdoctor at MIT University. I'm a colleague of Kiao. Today, I'm going to present some practical strategies to segment the nasal cavity from the CT or MRI scans to a complete nasal cavity model, CAD model. So I'm pretty sure that most of you have already familiar with these medical images. At the left side is CT images, and the right side is MRI images. And thanks, Joy, for the comprehensive descriptions of the CT images. That saves me a lot of time. I don't have to explain that again. And as I know that for some CT or MRI machines, they provide the simple airway, simple rendering effect of the organs in the CT images. But this is only a preview of your target model. What we want is the CFD simulation, which is performed in the clean nasal cavity model. Can this CFD simulation be performed using this messy model? Unfortunately, answer is no. This is mainly because to perform CFD simulation, we have to build a we call it discretization, or we call it meshing. And this meshing process requires a very clean CAD model. Otherwise, if the mesh quality is low, you never get a correct result, CFD result. Or sometimes the residual doesn't converge, even diverge. And here, I would like to show you some pictures about the mesh on the model. At the left side is the surface mesh on the nasal cavity wall. And at the right side, this one shows the volume mesh on the sagittal plane. And that one, the last one, I would like to show you some volume mesh on cross sections. You can see that the mesh volume, the aspect ratio, no matter aspect ratio or the skewness, is quite low in this model, so that to guarantee a proper CFD simulation. I also would like to show you some nasal models we previously segmented. Those models are the simplest model. And we can see that in those models, sinuses were not included. This is basically because sinuses are usually a big challenge to reconstruction. And the second problem is that the faces were not included. But why faces? But why the faces are important? This is because when you are performing a CFD simulation, the airflow distribution at the nostrils are usually not uniform. It's biased. And by keeping the faces, it will create a realistic airflow near the nostril, therefore guarantee a accurate simulation inside the nasal cavity. And second example is like this one. We tried to include paranasal sinuses into our nasal model. Unfortunately, because of this CT quality and because of our poor skills of the segmentation, the sinuses were not clean, and especially the ethmoid sinuses, they are grouped into one cell. Apparently, this is not what we want. And secondly, at that time, we didn't include the face. And I attempted to create another nasal cavity model, which includes the face and the maxillary sinus. However, I found it was still very difficult to segment the ethmoid sinuses, so I took it out. Later on, I discussed with many rhinologists and asked if my segmentation was good enough or if my simulation is meaningful to the rhinologists. Unfortunately, many of them told me that sinuses are very important in the nasal cavity model because although not much airflow is coming to the sinuses, the osteomedial complex in the nasal cavity model, in the nasal cavity, is there. It's like a critical part in the rhinologist's work. It reminds me that I have to develop a practical strategy for including all the sinuses. So I attempted this several months ago. So let me show you some practical tips to reconstruct the nasal cavity model, the complete nasal cavity model, including all the paranasal sinuses from a CT or MRI images. So the first tip, all those previous nasal cavity models were segmented from a commercial software called Mimics. And I know this is quite popular in this area. But the Mimics, although Mimics has lots of handy functions, I don't think it's a professional. Sometimes it lacks some professional functions to segment some detailed structures like ethmoid sinuses. So I changed the segmentation software from Mimics to 3D Slicer. So 3D Slicer is an open form. It's an open source module platform. Rather than like developing some simple workflows in Mimics, 3D Slicer is a module-based platform, which means the lead of developers combine some basic modules into this platform, and the doctors around the world are all contributing the modules into this platform, so that it has a much more powerful. It is much more powerful than Mimics, and you can select some cutting-edge technologies. You can always find cutting-edge technology in the 3D Slicer, and I found it's quite useful when segmenting the ethmoid sinuses. The second tip is that try to apply a filter before the segmentation, because when you get this kind of CT images, usually the boundary is not that clean, and you can see the images after the filter. This is called Laplacian sharpening filter. You can see the boundaries are cleaner than before. So it really helps us to improve the segmentation quality. And another thing that the reason why 3D Slicer is better than Mimics is that when you search the filters in Mimics, you can see that only 6 filters are included. And unfortunately, the filter I was searching for was not included in this Mimics. But in 3D Slicer, just in this simple filters module, you can find 345 filters. And finally, I found a suitable filter for my S-mode sinus segmentation. And the third tips is that please don't segment the whole cavity at once. Because when you are segmenting like this image, it's really hard to distinguish paranasal sinuses from the nasal airway passages. And you have to be you have to be very careful that sometimes what image shows is not correct. And sometimes you need to manually distinguish where the boundary is, and you have to cut it and improve it. So my suggestion is that it's better to segment different parts separately, one by one. I'll give you an example. So usually the maxillary sinuses are the easiest part to segment because the shape is very simple. And the second easiest part to segment is sphenoid sinuses, which is at the back of the model. And the third one is the frontal sinuses. Another advantage of segmenting them separately is that once you already got those masks, you can subtract those regions from the complete masks so that you can get a more reasonable masks for your S-mode sinus and nasal airways. The next part I will suggest is to segment the airway passages and leave the most difficult part to the last, which is the S-mode sinuses. And my fourth tip is that try to add the face into your model. And there's a very efficient way to segment the face in 3D Slicer, which is you can create a complete mask at the beginning. And then you find somewhere a cross-section near the nostril. And this is the coronal view of this plan, of this section, cross-section. And you can erase this mask near the the narrowest part, which is nasal valve, and then you get this mask, the black one, the black slice, splitting the external part and the nasal cavity part. And there's a very handy function in 3D Slicer that you can click the island and keep the selected island. Then you click this one, external one, so that the result is that the external mask is retained. So all those masks can be joined together to be exported as a complete nasal cavity model. And I would like to suggest you to keep 2 models. One is the joint model, which is this one, including face, including all the nasal cavity, all the paranasal sinuses, and also the nasal cavity. And the second one also, the second one is to export the nasal cavity model only. Why is that? I'll explain later. So if you look at the complete model from the back, you will see that the connections between, especially at the near the semilunar hiatus, is very complex, and it's really hard to cut here. So my solution is that you can draw the profile of this semilunar hiatus here in the nasal cavity model only, because in the nasal cavity only model, it's really easy to find the proper profile, and then you can use your CAD software to project this profile into your complete model. And when you click cut, the paranasal sinuses will be split up. So this is my final model. I separated into different pieces, different regions. And if I take all the sinuses out, you will find this is the semilunar hiatus towards the maxillary sinuses, anterior and middle ethmoid sinuses, and frontal sinuses. And here is the opening towards the posterior ethmoid sinuses. And last opening is here, it's located here towards the sphenoid sinuses. So the final model is very clean, and it's clean enough for meshing and afterwards CFD simulations. Although you can see my presentations, you can see from my presentations that the segmentation is quite clean and easy. Unfortunately, if you are a beginner of the segmentation, it may take you a week or even a month to do this work. But if you gain enough experience, it may cost you only half a day. That's all. Any questions?